When I joined the forestry team 2 years ago, I didn't think I would spend my days on the edge of insanity, gazing out into the vast expanse of wilderness and wondering if the world is really as quiet as it seems. On the surface, it seems like a peaceful job. Long walks in the woods, checking trails, watching for fires, and keeping the place peaceful. But there are things in the woods that can't be explained, and they only get scarier the deeper you go. Here's what happened to me. It all started with a routine night patrol. I was sent to a remote, rarely visited section of the park, a thicket of forest that most forest rangers avoid because it's hard to get to and, frankly, it's too close to old abandoned campgrounds. The stories about this place were always the same. Strange sounds, missing campers, sudden temperature swings that didn't match the weather, and the feeling that you were being watched. The kind of stories you brush off until something happens that can't be explained. This was supposed to be a routine watch. Check the trails, make sure no one was camping in a restricted area, and report every hour on the walkie-talkie. The walkie-talkie was my link to the outside world. There was a static crackle when the battery died, and sometimes, if you went too far into the woods, the signal was lost altogether. But that night it was just me and the trees. Nothing unusual, until I heard the first strange sound. It was barely audible at first, almost like the wind rustling through the leaves. But there was something wrong about it, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the normal sound of the wind. It seemed deliberate, as if someone was walking through the undergrowth, not even trying to hide their footsteps. I stopped and listened, trying to hear something that might explain this strange sound, but the forest was ominously quiet. After a moment, I heard it again, this time closer. My heart began to beat more frequently. It wasn't an animal, not with that rhythm. It was too steady, too human. I checked the radio to see if there was someone on the other end. Ranger 47 calling base, over. Silence. Ranger 47 calling base, over. I tried again, now with a more insistent voice. Again, nothing. The radio only made a sharp buzzing sound and then went silent. The hairs on the back of my neck were now standing on end. My instincts were telling me to move, to get out of here, but I didn't want to risk attracting attention. If something or someone was out there, the last thing I wanted was to show that I was scared. I slowly started walking, keeping my eyes on the tree line as the footsteps behind me continued. The sounds grew louder, faster, as if someone or something was following me. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight tighter, its beam darting from side to side. And then I saw it, a flickering shadow. It flashed between the trees. It wasn't a person. I couldn't describe it. The movement was too chaotic, as if something was trying to go unnoticed but wasn't quite managing it. I froze in place, and for a few seconds everything went silent. No footsteps, no movement, just the sound of my own breathing, sharp and frequent in the cold air. "Ranger 47, come in!" came a voice from the walkie-talkie, making me flinch. It was a voice I didn't recognize. Not my supervisor, not the other ranger. But it was clear as day. "Ranger 47, come in," the voice repeated. It sounded like it was trying to speak through a shroud of static. The voice was distant and muffled, but undeniably human. I pressed the button to speak into the radio. "This is Ranger 47. Who is this?" There was a long pause, the static getting louder before a single word came through. "Run!" The hair on the back of my neck stood up again. Who was that? How did they know I was here? How could they know what was going on? My heart was pounding frantically. I didn't have time to figure it out. I turned and ran, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, reflecting off the trees around me. I heard footsteps again, but this time they were ahead of me, moving faster than I could have hoped. Something, or someone, was getting closer. "Ranger 47, come in!" came the voice again, calm, almost like a whisper. "Where are you?" I exhaled into the radio, panting, stumbling over roots and rocks. The voice didn't answer right away. Then, just as I was ready to run out into the clearing, it spoke again, but this time it wasn't a command. "It's too late," the voice said, quiet and chilling. "You're not alone anymore." I looked around. Every tree seemed to be harboring something, every shadow now a potential threat. The footsteps that used to follow me were now ahead of me, getting closer with each passing second. I felt a presence, something intangible but overwhelming, standing on the edge of the flashlight beam's reach. And then the radio went silent. No static, no voices, just silence. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to look around. There, at the edge of the trees, stood a figure. Tall, too tall, and covered in shadows. Her eyes glowed, burned faintly like two dim red coals in the dark. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, tearing through the forest, not daring to look back again. I reached the base as it began to get light, but the figure stayed with me. It's been days since I was last on patrol, but the voice still echoes in my head. I don't know who or what was on the other end of that radio, but I don't think I'll ever be the same. I tried to go back there yesterday, hoping to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy, but when I got to the place where I heard the voice, the walkie-talkie came back to life. This time, the message was clear. You didn't listen. Now you're one of us. I haven't been back to work since. The forest has its secrets, and I think I've learned enough. But if you ever find yourself out there and hear a voice on your radio telling you to run, don't wait. Don't even hesitate, because the next time you hear it, you may not come back. This story happened to my father-in-law's cousin, John, when he was just a kid. It all happened in the late 80s, in the midst of economic changes in the country. But in their small town where they lived, the old factories were still there, even though they were working at maximum capacity. Their family was large. Their grandmother, John's mother, younger brother Tommy, and sister Liz. They lived poorly in an old pre-revolutionary house that the factory had given them. They had a large plot of land and kept livestock. There was a vegetable garden. Somehow they survived. Until in the summer when strange things started happening. First with my little brother Tommy. Grandma sent him down to the cellar to get potatoes. It was getting dark. Tommy went out. And he's gone. 10 minutes, half an hour. Everybody's out looking for him. They found him sleeping in the hayloft. They woke him up and asked, "Are you crazy? Where are the potatoes?" And he flapped his sleepy eyes, not understanding anything. "What potatoes? I've been here all evening tilling hay. I got tired and fell asleep." Grandma was shocked, thought the kid was playing a trick. But someone went to the cellar then, and then with my sister Lisa, an incident. Mother is sitting in the yard peeling potatoes. Lisa, with a bucket of millet, passes by her to the hen house. Her mother shouts to her, "What are you doing? It's too early to feed the chickens. Go and help me peel the potatoes." As if she didn't hear and went on her way. She's gone and she's gone. Mother had already peeled all the potatoes, but Lisa was still gone. I went to the hen house to check where my daughter had disappeared to. She came up and there was no one there. Only the hen house wicket was open and the bucket with millet overturned, around which the chickens crowded. Mother rushed to Liza's room, but she was sitting quietly as if nothing had happened on her bed reading a book. Her mother shouted at her, "Have you completely lost your mind? You threw the bucket, the chickens did not close." And Lisa looks at her like a mad woman. "Mom, what are you doing? I didn't leave the room at all. I was doing my homework." Mother is horrified. What the hell? And the creepiest thing happened to John himself. He was older than everyone else, about 20 years old. He'd been working in the field all day, fixing a combine harvester. He came home late, tired as a dog. He came to the house, and his mother was standing on the doorstep. She looks at him with frightened eyes, pale as death, and in a trembling voice she says, "John? Who's sitting and eating in the house?" John runs into the house, and at the table sits him. It's like a mirror image of himself. Only his eyes are blank, and he's eating with his hands right out of his plate. John was stunned, and the double suddenly froze. He looked at him frowning. "Tasty, however, Mom cooks beef stew," he said, and smirked. John grabbed the poker out of fear and hit his double on the head, and his skull cracked. He fell off the chair dead. The whole family jumped out of the yard, scared to death in what they were wearing. They spent the night in the field, better than staying in that damn house. In the morning, there was nowhere to go, and it was necessary to go back anyway. This time, John armed himself with an axe. He approaches the house cautiously, but he is shaking with fear. He doesn't know what he might see inside. He quietly opens the door, and there is no one in the place where he beat himself with the poker. Only a plate on the table, cleaned out. So they hastily packed up their things, sold the cattle to neighbors for pennies, and left for the city. P.S. John, when he came to take the settlement in the factory, met his neighbor, and he said to him, "Well, did your mother make you some beef stew?" John stands there, his eyes staring at him in incomprehension. The neighbor noticed his confusion. "What are you doing, John? Don't you remember? We saw each other yesterday near your yard. You also told me, if you see your mother, tell her to come make me some beef stew." John had a lump in his throat. He couldn't answer. So he ran away from the stunned neighbor. It is not known what happened to that house. John's whole family tried not to think about it. My grandmother died when I was 6 years old. About a week later, I realized something very important. It happened by accident. We were in the living room. I was sitting on the floor playing with my dolls, wishing my mom would play with me. Mom was sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. She had barely spoken to me since my grandmother died, and hardly did anything at all. I looked at my silent mom, opened my mouth, and without knowing why myself, said, "Grandma says you have to play with me." The reaction was amazing. Mom opened her eyes wide, looked at me, right at me, saw me. She got up from the couch, knelt down beside me, hugged me, and exclaimed, "Oh, my dear daughter, grandmother told you that?" And then burst into tears. Her face was wet with tears, and she picked up my doll and started moving it around on the floor. After that, I realized that Mom would listen if Grandma asked her to do something. It was like Grandma never died, like she used to make my mom give me cookies. It was probably about a month later, and I suddenly remembered something Grandma had told me. I turned to my mom, opened my mouth, and said, "Grandma said Aunt Viola was such a beautiful girl. Too bad she got fat." Once again, I got an amazing reaction. Mom opened her eyes wide with shock, knelt down beside me, stared at me, and asked, "Maya, how could you know that? When did Grandma tell you that?" I blinked. I didn't remember very well, and the look on Mom's face was a little scary. Maybe Grandma had said it to me on the days I stayed with her while Mom was at work. Mom would leave me with her at 2 o'clock and pick me up later when I wanted to go to bed. Grandma often talked about fullness, or maybe she said it another time. "Yesterday?" I said. "She said it to me yesterday, when we were at the park and we were looking at the fat kids." Yeah, that's right. Mom and the other woman were talking about fat kids, as Grandma often did. Mom hugged me so tight I felt like I was going to choke. Her tears were warm on my neck and wet my t-shirt. "Oh, my precious daughter," Mom sobbed. Mom told Aunt Viola what I had said, and asked me to tell Aunt Viola myself. "Look, Viola, I told you, Mommy talks to us through Maya. Tell her, Maya. Tell your aunt what grandmother told you." I remember so well looking at Mama and Auntie, at their shining, desperate eyes. I opened my mouth and repeated, "Grandma told me you were such a beautiful girl, Aunt Viola. It's a pity you've gotten fat." Aunt Viola cried out as if she had been hit and covered her mouth with her hand. Mom smiled proudly at me, her special daughter who could talk to her grandmother. Everyone knew I was special because I could talk to my grandmother who would tell me different things. My cousins treated me with respect after that, even though I was the youngest, and even my uncles nodded to me when they came to family dinners. My cousins tried to get me to say something else I had heard from the dead. I would start to say something, but then Mom and Aunt Viola would stop them. "This is not a trick. Stop picking on Maya." And then one day when I was 10, one of my cousins, my favorite cousin, Aria, told me that her father was hurting her. I knew I had to stop it. After all, I was special, wasn't I? And Aria was the kindest to me. I waited until the next family dinner. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. "Uncle," I said clearly. The voices hushed. Everyone knew that tone meant Grandma was giving someone a message. "Uncle," I repeated. "Grandma said you have to stop hurting my cousin." Silence reigned. Uncle made some kind of sound. Mom did too. Then I sighed like I couldn't breathe. I screamed, grabbing my throat. The air rumbled and thickened. Through the thick, darkening air, I saw the faces of everyone present blur. They stared at me without moving. I sighed again, and my throat felt as if it was constricted, as if I had the worst pain in my throat. For a moment, in the encroaching darkness, I saw my grandmother. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. Then it was over. I opened my eyes, standing perfectly still at the dining room table, holding on to the back of the chair. My throat still ached, but the unbearable pain was gone. I tried to make a sound, but there were no words. After that dinner, I could never speak again. And even when I learned to communicate without my voice, I never, ever spoke about my grandmother and her children again. My cousin Aria and I left our family home as soon as we could and never went back there again.